Have you ever tried to escape from the noise, the deadlines, and the chaos of city life, only to find that your new sanctuary is suddenly under siege? That's exactly what happened to me when I moved into my grandfather's cabin in Pine Valley. I thought I was finally free. I thought I could find peace in the pines, surrounded by the woods, with nothing but the sound of wind and birds in the air. But instead, I found myself tangled in something much uglier, a battle for my family's legacy, a fight for what was rightfully mine. It all started with a simple, ordinary day. The day I decided to chop some firewood with my grandfather's old axe. It wasn't meant to be anything special, just a little project to settle into my new life. But what seemed like a peaceful moment quickly turned into a nightmare. I was on my own land, in the backyard of the cabin that had been in my family for decades, when a woman named Carolyn Finch, who I'd never even met, decided to make a scene. She called the cops. Why? Because she thought I looked unstable and armed. Can you imagine that? Just because I was chopping wood, on my own property, with an axe that had belonged to my grandfather, I was suddenly considered a threat. It's funny how things turn when you inherit something that means the world to you. Instead of a welcome to the community, I got a violation letter from the HOA president. Carolyn Finch, in all her perfection, sent me a warning about the eyesore that was my grandfather's cabin and the fence he built with his own hands. Instead of a neighborly handshake, I was hit with a demand to tear down the legacy that was as much a part of this land as the pine trees themselves. I had come here to find peace. The kind of peace you get from living in a place untouched by time. Pine Valley was supposed to be a fresh start, a break from the madness. I wanted to hear the rustling of leaves, to breathe the cool, fresh air, and to remember my grandfather in every corner of the cabin. But instead, I was met with threats and warnings, as if the very thing that connected me to this place was a problem. Carolyn Finch was only the beginning. But let me tell you, she wasn't going to take away my memories, my history, not without a fight. I tried to tell myself that maybe this was just a misunderstanding, that maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew the truth. Carolyn Finch wasn't about to back down. She didn't care about the stories tied to the fence, the summers spent building it with Grandpa Joe, or the lessons we learned in sweat and sun. To her, it was just another outdated relic in a world that demanded conformity. I spent the night thinking about the words my grandfather used to say. Good fences make good neighbors, he used to tell me as we worked together, side by side, building that fence with our own hands. But he also always added, good neighbors make great memories. Those afternoons spent measuring, cutting, and hammering were more than just labor. They were the foundation of who I was. That fence wasn't just a physical boundary, it was a testament to the time, love, and effort my grandfather had put into every inch of it. But Carolyn didn't see it that way. She didn't see the value in something that had been made with care, with intention. To her, it was just a violation of the standards she believed the community should uphold. That morning, I had tried to do things the right way. I sent an email, polite and professional, to the Pine Valley Community Board, hoping that maybe we could resolve this without escalating things further. I even attached pictures, explained the purpose of the fence, and asked if there was any leeway for historical structures like mine. I didn't expect much, but I didn't expect what came next. A few days later, I received a thick red envelope. One of those dreaded notices from the community. My heart sank as I read through the harsh language, the words threatening financial penalties if I didn't tear down the fence within 2 weeks. The letter was filled with bureaucratic jargon about compliance and aesthetic integrity, but none of it mattered. I was being told to erase a piece of my family's history, to erase the bond between me and my grandfather. I could feel the pressure mounting, but I wasn't about to back down. If Carolyn Finch thought she could bully me into tearing down that fence, she had another thing coming. The memories attached to it were more valuable than any rule she could throw at me. But even more than that, the thought of giving up what Grandpa Joe had built, that's not who I am. That's not who my family is. We don't just let things go when they matter. And this fence mattered. So, I made a decision that night, after reading that red envelope for the 100th time. The fence was staying. I wasn't about to erase my grandfather's legacy. Not for anyone. But that was just the beginning of the battle. The next morning, I decided to take the first step in standing my ground. I called my cousin, Ben, to let him know about the situation. I needed someone who understood. "Sounds like you've got a neighbor who thinks she runs the place," Ben said with a laugh, but I could tell it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the kind of laugh that came from someone who knew exactly how things like this worked. "Just remember, sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease, but sometimes it gets replaced." I didn't know it then, but those words would be more prophetic than I realized. That afternoon, I spent my time looking over the letter again, and the pile of papers Carolyn had given me. It was clear that she was ready to escalate this. And while I tried to remain calm, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was testing me, seeing how far she could push before I buckled. By Thursday, I started to wonder if maybe Carolyn's letter was just a scare tactic. Perhaps she was the type of person who used threats to establish control over the new folks in the neighborhood, but would back down when confronted. I wanted to believe that. So, I spent the evening drafting a polite, professional email to the Pine Valley Community Board. I took the high road. I attached pictures of the fence and explained the practical and sentimental reasons behind it. I even included a little history about Grandpa Joe and the time we spent building it together. I was hoping that maybe someone on the board would see the truth. But the response I got wasn't what I expected. The next day, I found an alert in my email inbox, a community-wide security alert. Pine Valley's version of a watch list. It wasn't about me specifically, but it didn't need to be. The subject line read, "Security alert, heightened vigilance required." And there it was, under the guise of community safety, a vague description of a new resident who had shown concerning patterns of non-cooperation and had potentially disregarded community safety protocols. It was about me. And what's worse, it was a public warning sent to every single person in Pine Valley. I could feel the color drain from my face as I read through it. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. Carolyn had turned me into a target. A security threat. In one email, she had labeled me as a danger to the community, even though all I had done was try to live my life, quietly, in my grandfather's cabin. I thought I could ignore it. But everywhere I went, people started treating me differently. At the hardware store, the clerk who had been friendly on my first visit now greeted me with nothing but politeness, barely looking me in the eye. The elderly man across the street, who had waved at me just a week ago, now nodded stiffly and hurried back inside his house. I had become a pariah, all because one person, Carolyn Finch, had decided I was the problem. The weight of the situation began to settle in. What had started as a simple dispute over a fence had now turned into a full-on campaign against me. It wasn't just Carolyn Finch anymore. It was the entire community, or at least the part of it that had decided to believe her version of things. I had become the outcast in a place where I had hoped to find peace. I could feel the isolation creeping in, as neighbors who once seemed friendly started avoiding eye contact. The more Carolyn spread her narrative, the more I felt like a stranger in my own home. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not now. Not after everything my grandfather had built, not after the life I had hoped to create here. That evening, I picked up the phone and dialed Aunt Mary. She had been Grandpa Joe's sister, the one who always seemed to know exactly what to say in times of trouble. Her voice, warm and steady, was like a balm for my frustration. "Oh, Liam," she said when I explained everything, "you know what your grandpa used to say when people tried to push him around?" She paused, and I could almost hear the smile in her voice. "He'd tell me, Mary, I planted those trees for peace, not to watch them grow in fear. Your grandfather built that fence with his own hands. He taught you to respect the value of honest work and family history. Don't let anyone turn that gift into something you're ashamed of. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about a fence, about some wooden posts and planks of cedar. This was about honoring Grandpa Joe's legacy. And if that meant standing up against an HOA president who wanted to erase my family's history, then that's exactly what I was going to do. Aunt Mary was the one who reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. This wasn't just about me. It was about standing up for the values that had shaped me, for the man I was becoming. The man Grandpa Joe had hoped I would be. And I couldn't let fear, or the pressure from a single woman with too much power, take that away from me. You need to document everything, Aunt Mary continued. If they want to mess with you, make sure you've got everything written down. Keep records. Get witnesses. You don't let them isolate you. That's how they win. Don't give them that satisfaction. I hung up the phone feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't going to let Carolyn Finch, or anyone else, bully me into giving up. I was going to fight this with everything I had. The next morning, I started putting Aunt Mary's advice into action. I documented every violation notice I had received, every email, every phone call. I wasn't going to let this go unnoticed. I wasn't going to let Carolyn's narrative be the only one that mattered. But the battle was far from over. Carolyn Finch wasn't just going to roll over. She had already shown that she was willing to use her position to get what she wanted. And I had a feeling that things were about to get a lot worse before they got better. The days dragged on, each one filled with more tension than the last. It felt like I was living in a pressure cooker, every moment building towards something, but I couldn't figure out what. I kept expecting things to calm down, but they never did. Carolyn's grip on the neighborhood seemed to tighten with each passing day. Every time I checked my mailbox, there was another red envelope, another notice, another accusation. It was as if I couldn't escape the scrutiny, no matter how hard I tried to just live my life. One afternoon, after another exhausting round of violations, I had had enough. I needed to take control of this situation. I needed to stop being a passive participant in my own downfall. So, I decided to confront Carolyn head-on. I drafted a letter, formal and respectful, but firm. It wasn't just about the fence anymore, it was about the bullying, the harassment, the way my neighbors had turned against me based on lies and half-truths. I wasn't just fighting for a fence, I was fighting for my dignity, for the right to live in peace. I sent the letter to the Pine Valley Community Board, along with photos, citations, and a request for information about any potential grandfather clauses that might apply to my situation. I wasn't going to give in. Not now, not ever. And then, the response came, not in the form of an email or another formal letter. No. This time, it was a phone call. My neighbor, the one who worked from home, called me to give me a heads up. "Liam," she said, her voice low and concerned. "I just got an email from the community board. Well, not about you specifically, but it's pretty obvious it's about you." I felt my stomach drop. My neighbor hesitated, and then she continued, "It's a security alert. It talks about a new resident who's been showing, well, concerning patterns. It's not even specific, but the way it's worded, it makes you sound like a troublemaker. I just wanted you to know." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Carolyn had gone so far as to turn me into a criminal. A threat to the neighborhood, all because I wanted to keep a piece of my family's history. The realization hit me hard, this wasn't about offense. This was personal. Carolyn had crossed a line, and now she had made herself my enemy. I had no choice now. I had to fight back, and I had to do it publicly. I couldn't just stand by while my reputation was destroyed, while I was painted as a dangerous person for wanting to honor my grandfather. That night, after talking to my neighbor, I sat down and started planning my next move. I had the evidence I needed. I had the photos of the fence, the letters, and now, I had the support of a few neighbors who had started to see the truth. But I needed something more. I needed a way to get the community to listen. To see me as I really was, and not as Carolyn had painted me. And that's when I had the idea. I decided to organize a meeting. A meeting where I could present the evidence, where I could show everyone the truth. I didn't care if Carolyn tried to shut me down. I was going to make sure this story was heard. I was going to fight for what was right, for what my grandfather had built, and for the peace I had come here to find. The day of the community meeting arrived, and the atmosphere was nothing like I had expected. I had prepared meticulously, gathering every piece of evidence, every email, every violation notice, and the security footage that proved Carolyn's harassment. I had set up a projector and a laptop, ready to show the neighborhood the truth, no matter what. But as I walked into the community center, I was struck by the sight of how many people had shown up. The room was packed, filled with neighbors who had been affected by Carolyn's rule, some quietly hoping for change, others quietly skeptical. And at the front of the room sat Carolyn Finch, her cold demeanor still intact, but I could see the cracks forming. She wasn't as confident as she once had been. When she spoke, her voice trembled just slightly. "We must defend our standards," she said, her usual authoritative tone faltering. "We've worked so hard to create this community." But it was clear to everyone in the room that her words weren't convincing anyone anymore. People were listening, really listening, and for the first time, Carolyn seemed unsure of herself. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my voice steady, despite the nerves that threatened to creep in. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for all the families who had been pushed around, who had been threatened and intimidated by someone who thought she had the right to control everyone. I started by quoting the Pine Valley Community Guidelines, specifically the section about board members' conduct. Then, one by one, I presented the evidence, the violation notices for ridiculous things, the false reports made to government agencies, and the 911 call that had turned a simple act of chopping wood into an emergency. Finally, I dimmed the lights and played the security footage of Carolyn trespassing on my property, taking photos, measuring my grass, and trying to find reasons to accuse me of violating community standards. The gasps in the room were enough to tell me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about the kind of leadership this community deserved. It was about standing up for what was right, and for the first time, it felt like the tide was turning in my favor. One by one, the testimonies of other neighbors came forward. George Peterson, the elderly man across the street, stood up and spoke about how Carolyn had bullied him and his family for years. Others shared stories of being harassed over the smallest things, from mailbox colors to kids' drawings on the sidewalk. Each story built upon the last, showing that Carolyn's actions weren't just about enforcing rules. They were about wielding power for her own gain. And then, the moment of truth came. I made my formal request to the community, to remove Carolyn Finch from her position as president of the board. I explained that her actions went far beyond what was acceptable and that the community deserved better. The room fell silent as the ballots were passed out. The energy in the room was palpable. People knew that this wasn't just about one person. It was about reclaiming their right to live in peace, without fear of arbitrary rules and intimidation. When the votes were counted, the result was undeniable. 38 votes in favor of removal. 5 against. Carolyn Finch was removed from her position, and just like that, her reign of control ended. The relief in the room was overwhelming. People stood up, some applauding, others just breathing a sigh of relief. For the first time in months, the atmosphere in Pine Valley felt different. It felt like a community again. And then, as if on cue, Carolyn stood up. She gathered her papers, her face pale, and with a final, desperate look toward the crowd, she said, "You have no idea what you've done to this community." Her voice cracked with emotion, but it was clear that she was done. The room remained silent as she walked out the door, and just like that, her influence was gone. In the weeks that followed, Pine Valley began to heal. The new board president was elected, and under her leadership, things began to change. The petty regulations that had caused so much friction were re-evaluated, and a sense of fairness and respect returned to the neighborhood. My fence, which had been a symbol of defiance, was now a symbol of victory, a reminder that standing up for what's right can change everything. And as for me, I had found the peace I was searching for. The peace that comes from knowing that you fought for something that mattered. That you honored your family, your history, and your values. I sat on the porch of my grandfather's cabin, looking at the fence that had started it all, and I realized that sometimes, the greatest victories come when you stand your ground, even when it seems like the world is against you. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.